and gentlemen, welcome to the Extraordinary Family Life Podcast. We are your hosts, Greg and Rachel Denning. Just got back from an amazing day at the beach where, let's just say,
some sun?
I got a lot of vitamin D today. You know what I'm saying? Feeling good. Feeling nourished by the sun. Okay, I had no intention of sharing this, but I'm just going to share it just to ruffle some feathers. We do not use sunscreen. Because
this is like a tangent in the
total
wrong
tangent.
direction.
Yep, wrong
this
direction.
Is not that
everything.
Podcast, Greg.
It's toxic sludge. It's a chemical, and people think the sun is like killing us. It's not. The sun is nourishing us.
Giving us life.
It's giving us life. It's amazing, and it has for many thousands of years. And now all of a sudden, people are like, "We need to put chemicals all over our bodies," and our skin is absorbing all those chemicals. And what's really damaging our bodies is the way we eat. That's the real thing. Now,
and the chemicals.
Now, just saying that, I'm going to get some hate mail, except
and then we
don't
can
get
make a
mail
podcast
anymore.
about it. So
it's getting people fired up
tangent,
here. But do your homework. Look into it. Read. Be open to it. Be like, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to consider it. I guess that's what my invitation is. Consider new ideas, because I mean, somebody comes out. You know who comes up with the sunscreen idea? It's people who sell sunscreen. And they're like, no, you need this to protect you. And, man, they make millions. And everyone's like, oh, I need that. And then we buy it. And it's like, why are you putting all those chemicals on your skin? Anyways, okay, back to topic. We have been thinking a lot, for the last 23 years or more about this idea. But we're having adventures all the time. We're making big decisions often. As we've leaned into living an extraordinary life, we've leaned into making big decisions often.
Yes. And I think part of a catalyst is while we were at the beach today, I got a really great question from a friend that sparked this conversation with us. And I think it's important and necessary to address here because it really is a key element or ingredient to the basis of our podcast, An Extraordinary Family Life. You know, we have to be able to understand this process and embrace it and move forward with it, because without it, we end up living a life that's less than extraordinary. We end up living a life that's maybe not full of what it is we actually truly desire or actually want. And so for me, that's the catalyst of this conversation. I know you have some other points you want to address as well, but I'll just start with a question. I think it was essentially along the lines of, in the framework of just having adventures and doing things and going out and being exposed to new things and new places and new environments. The question is along the lines of, have you ever, specifically referring to our family, come upon some adventure or experience or goal that you're pursuing and felt so overwhelmed by it that you decided not to do it? It was in essence that, something along those lines. And that's such a really great question, because I feel that all of us have faced that feeling at some point where we want to do something, but then when we get to the reality of doing it, the challenge of it is so overwhelming, right? Like the word that was used, that we just are like, I can't do this. It's not possible. And so we don't do it. Now, as I'm speaking here, because part of my answer to her at the time was, well, yeah, we have, but I couldn't think of a time right then when we backed away from it, because we're going to go into that. Why? But that's just not how we approach things in life.
The why initially was my craziness. I just became a ready, fire, aim guy.
That definitely plays a part of it.
I would just go.
Right.
Like, no. Like, what about all this stuff? I don't care. Let's go. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And out the door we went.
Yeah.
And I started living like that at 16. And I would just, like, bold, crazy decisions. Didn't even think through logistics. I'm like, I am jumping out of this airplane. I will build a parachute on the way down. Like,
and
whatever.
we're definitely not going to be talking in this podcast that that's a virtue and that's the way you
Right.
should do things.
It's just the way
That
we
was
did
enough
things.
to get us started.
Yep.
For sure, I
Yep.
think. And that was part of it. When we started our crazy, unconventional life, we were both very young. We were in our 20s, and there was a lot of that. You were the impetus as far as that goes, and I just kind of was like, okay, let's go. And that definitely...
I'm so grateful that you were at least willing to go along.
Yeah.
Good. Well, and so those of you might be new to us or might not know this about us, Rachel's very much the logistics and the planner, and she
and the homebody,
and introverted, homebody, like wants things comfortable and luxurious,
in control,
wants control,
a plan,
have the whole environment, let's not have any chaos or uncertainty here, no spontaneity. And I was the opposite.
Right.
I was the storm and impetuosity and no, let's just go have an adventure. Oh, that seems great. Let's go.
Yeah.
And luckily you came along, probably because I was such a force of nature, and you didn't want to get
and
abandoned.
I was in love, and I, just was. It was exciting. I feel like it was. It was
very exciting.
And
it led to a genuinely epic life.
Oh, totally, it did. And I feel like I had a lot of trust in you of like, okay, like you never seemed hesitant about it. You're just like, we'll figure it out. Yeah. And I believed that.
And we did.
We did.
Yeah. I guess, let me pause. That's why I wouldn't recommend it. This wouldn't be an episode of like, hey guys, you should just go for it and figure it out later. I don't think I would recommend that to anyone, because here's why. I knew what I was either A, capable of, or B, capable of becoming. Mm-hmm. I knew myself, and I knew that I was willing to put in all the work to figure it out. Like if we get down there and it's a tough situation, I know I have what it takes to get us out of it.
Right.
Not everybody does that. That's why I can never give that advice, that recommendation, hey, just go for it, because I don't know what you're made of.
Right.
I don't know what kind of metal, METTLE, I don't know what kind of metal is inside of you.
Yeah.
I don't know what you've got.
Well,
and you might get down there and throw in the towel, and they're like, oh man, now you're toast.
And in reality, because yes, we took that sort of path where it was just very impetuous and we just went for it, but it worked out because you were willing to do that. Mm-hmm. And so when the challenges came, which they did, trust me, they came, you just did whatever you had to make it work.
Yep.
Whether that was literally carrying 3 children at a time out of a canyon, because that happened. We went on this 5-mile hike. It got dark. We had 3 children you were carrying. I was carrying the baby. Like, you just did you just muscled through whatever had to be done and did it with a smile. Yep. So that it worked out. Which I think in this whole formula, that was a key piece, because if, on the other hand, we got to situations like that and you're done and I'm done and the kids are done and we're all just like, then it's miserable. Yep. We hate it and we're like, we're never doing that again. But instead we learned to love adventure because you made it fun and exciting, even at the hardest and worst parts. Even when we all just wanted to give up and cry, you helped us get through, and that just like nurtured the desire for more adventure, because, oh, actually that was fun. It was good. It was hard. It was so hard, but that's also what made it fun. Mm. So that plays a huge role, and you're right. You can't just recommend that to everyone, because if someone doesn't have that capability, it's not going to work. Yep. Someone has to be able to have that mettle to carry everyone through when you get to the sucky part.
Yep.
Because it's going to happen.
And I guess because at my core, somewhere along this path of from going from utter fear and incompetence and insecurity, I don't know exactly where it happened, but somewhere in that journey, I adopted this ancient belief of I'll either find a way or I'll make one.
Like the stoicism.
Yeah. I will either find a way or I will make one.
Yeah.
And I live by that principle. And so when I say, hey, let's go down this road, I have committed to like whatever's down there. We don't know. We have no idea what we're facing. Whatever's down that road, I'll either find a way or I'll make one. And that's why we've been able to do so many things.
Exactly. So going back, on the beach there, I couldn't remember a time when we faced something that felt overwhelming. Okay, wait. Everything, we're going to get into this. Everything we have faced has felt overwhelming.
Every big decision will.
Every big decision, every big dream, every big trip we've planned, it's always felt overwhelming at the beginning. But I can't remember anything in the last 10 or 15 years that we faced that was overwhelming, that because it was overwhelming, we decided not to do it. That has not happened.
Yeah, that's never been...
Which I want to...
in my framework.
Yeah, which I want to talk through that because I think that's important and in my mind a key emphasis of this episode. But while I was introducing this episode, I did remember one experience early on, and I think that this did happen early on in our marriage. And you might think that this is a weird example, but it's the one that came to my mind, so I'm going to share it.
I'm so intrigued.
I know.
I have no idea what you're going to say.
We adopted, and again, whatever, people know we're weird. We adopted our first child. And somewhere along the line, I had read that even if you had not given birth, it was possible to induce milk to breastfeed adopted babies. Okay, so of course right away people are like, whoa, that's weird. I'd never been pregnant before, but I wanted to try it. I wanted to try to breastfeed my adopted baby, and so I tried to induce milk. There was like herbs you could take, there was like nipple stimulation, this is getting weird, I know, but like this is a whole thing. But when we there was even a kit I bought, like you could put milk in a thing and then you would like have this little tube that attached to your nipple. Like this is a whole thing. It's a whole industry. I remember trying it when we got her and it was just, first of all, if you've breastfed, you know it's hard. Anyways, breastfeeding's hard. Breastfeeding without milk, that's hard. Okay, it was way harder than I had even anticipated.
Especially first time.
Especially as a first time mom, right? Yeah. So I do remember that, like, I don't know, it was a week or two after we had got her. And I was just like, this is too hard. I'm not doing this. I can't do this, right? I remember that feeling. So that was the feeling that came up right now when I was introducing this topic. Because otherwise, I really don't remember things that we've decided to undertake that we backed away from doing because it was just too hard. Now, I do want to clarify in this, though. There are things we have decided not to do because we believed, we believed the amount of effort and work required to do it was not worth it for us for that thing. If that makes sense.
I think this is important because...
That's different, though.
It's revealing... Basically, all we're ever doing here is like sharing what has worked for us. And what this example is illustrating is one aspect of how we make decisions. Like, we don't back away because it's overwhelming. We'll totally back away if we feel like the exchange rate is what we call the exchange rate is too much. Like if it's going to sacrifice too much of our health or our family or happiness, we're out.
Right.
If we feel like, it's going to take this much work and the reward's going to be this small, like, that sucks. Tons of work for a small reward. We're out. But I can't think of anything either where we ever thought, if it's too overwhelming, we won't do it. Like that's just not how we play.
And I think because of what we explained before, that we began pursuing an unconventional lifestyle with this ready, fire, aim approach, that actually was helpful in a lot of ways because it gave us a lot of experience. We really went out there and we, one of the success principles, I think, in Jack Canfield's success principles is like, in order to succeed, you have to fail more. And we did a lot of failing in those early years just by doing that, like jumping out of a plane. Just not literally, but, figuratively, we're just trying all of these things. We're just going for it with very little plan, very little thinking ahead almost, which, seems impetuous and stupid and not wise. And I think all of that's true, but because of the mindset we had, because of our situation in life, we just did it anyways, and that gave us so much life experience. Like tons and tons and tons of life experience. And because we had all that life experience, we learned that anything that you pursue that's worth doing is going to be, one, way harder than you imagined it would be. In fact, some people say it'll be 10 times harder than you imagined. It'll take 10 times as long, which essentially those two things are the definition of overwhelm. When you get into pursuing the thing you want, that you imagine this dream. In fact, I was just telling my son this the other day. I'm like, a lot of people don't realize that when you start pursuing your dream life, what you're actually doing is signing up for solving problems.
Yep.
That's actually what a dream life is. Solving problems. Learning how to think and make decisions and overcome and handle things step by step by step. That's the only way to actually achieve your dream life. But for so many people, that just looks like and feels like overwhelm.
Right. And for many people, just to hear that, they're like, oh, I'm out.
Right.
I'm out. Wait, hold up. You're telling me a dream life is just bigger problems? Like,
and more work?
I'm out.
Yeah.
As though, and again, it's ironic and naive, but as though, like, if I don't pursue my dreams, I won't have any problems. Like, that's
still
never
will.
going to happen.
You're still going to have problems.
You're going to have problems. So you're like, well, if I chase my goals and my targets, I'm going to have problems. So I'm not going to. And so you stay home and have problems. You're like, well, either way you have problems. Mm-hmm. Either way you have challenges. So why not live an awesome life?
Right.
I don't get this. I truly don't. I cannot wrap my head around it. Why would anyone choose to live a boring life? Mm-hmm. I can't. And I've heard people talk about it, but still I'm like, I don't get it. If an awesome experience is available, why would you choose a boring one?
Right.
If a great life is an option for you, why would you settle for a lame existence? A humdrum, mediocre, boring it's ennui, right? It's just like blah. No stimulation, no excitement, no challenge, just empty.
Right.
Flat line.
And while you say you don't understand it, on a psychological level, we do understand it because we know it's fear and essentially overwhelm that's holding people back. That is what's getting in the way.
They don't want to be uncomfortable. They don't want change. They want what's familiar. This is what's always been done. They're kind of living unconsciously. So again,
a lot of it is sometimes
I know why it's
unconscious.
happening, but I'm like, well, I still don't get like why anyone would actually choose that. If you're aware, you're like, hey, this is possible, and it's going to require some more work. I never in my mind would be like, okay, I'm out.
Right.
Like, what? No, man.
And, essentially it's facing those fears and breaking down the overwhelm into bite-sized pieces, or rather, it's a lack of doing those things.
Right. That's causing the main
That's
problem.
causing the
failure of pursuit.
Okay, yes, exactly. It's causing them to fail to pursue those things that they want because ultimately people do want those things.
Right, because that's the irony.
Want that.
They'll sit and complain about their circumstances. I mean, they'll tell you just all the time. I talk to people every day, all day, and people are like, I hate my life. I'm like,
or I hate this part of my life.
I hate, that's more of
not like they hate their
more
whole
likely.
life.
It's not that they hate their life; it's that they hate their circumstances, or they're like, well, I don't like this and I don't like that. I'm like, okay, well, here's what you do to change it.
Well, didn't one of your coaching clients just the other day say, "You're just literally making my life harder, Greg"?
Right, and well, they all say that to me all the time. And because it looks like it. It looks initially more demanding. Mm-hmm. And this is what I explained to him. I'm like, hey, man. And this is what I explained to all my clients. Like, this isn't new. He's not the first one who's like, oh, this is hard. It's like, they're like, oh.
And we were there too.
It looks like a lot of work. And some of it is, but the simplicity is on the far side of the complexity. Mm-hmm. The ease is on the other side of difficulty. Like, it's like setting up the system and putting it in place. Then on the other side, it's like, wow, it's actually easier.
And better.
Way better.
And happier and more fun and
so,
like all of the things you want.
I just get, exactly. I'm baffled. I'm like, wait, why? Why would anyone not want to be happy, healthy, and wealthy?
But I do get it because I am remembering, especially when we embarked on our initial journeys, like it was terrifying. And I think in one of our previous podcasts we talked about this thing that happens in your brain when you have a certain number of neural connections and understanding. Essentially, it's a form of wisdom, is what it is, that you're able to begin to recognize patterns. And we had talked about how, one of the patterns of pursuing your dreams is that you're going to face these obstacles that feel insurmountable, right? Now, the benefit we have, and the thing that we're talking about in this podcast, is we have learned through experience that that's simply the price tag. The price tag of the dream you want and the life you want to live are all of those obstacles you have to go through. Because those are the obstacles that will transform you as a person into the person who can have that dream life. That's the pattern. Now, it's difficult to see that, though, especially if it's like your first time, especially if you've never had that experience. And so essentially, when she was asking me this question on the beach, I'm like, yes, I'm sure there have been times, just like my silly breastfeeding example, when we came up across something and we were like, this is way harder than I thought it would be. But we have learned, and it started by us being impetuous, to not turn away from that because it's overwhelming, but to see like, this is the pathway. This is the way to actually achieving the thing that we want. And so now, in a way, not always literally, but figuratively, when we see those obstacles and that overwhelm, we're like, woohoo, yes, that means this is the right path.
Bring it on.
That means this is the way to achieving everything it is we want.
Yeah.
Even though it's still not fun, per se.
Right. I got to share another pattern that I remembered. And I think this is really important. We also, when we started chasing our dreams like that, and we were facing our fears, because there was a lot of fears.
Oh, yeah.
I often remember getting on the other side and be like, that wasn't near as scary as we thought it was going to be.
In fact, I remember that my fear of the thing was way worse than the thing itself.
Yes. And that happened to us so many times, simply because we were trying so many things. It seemed scary. Then we did it, and we're like, that wasn't very scary. We did it again. Oh, that seems scary. Then we did it. It's like, oh, that wasn't that scary. And whether it was facing the unknown or making changes or the
driving
fear
across
of failure.
the border into Mexico for the first time.
Right. All these are like, oh, there's a threat here. Or that could happen. This could happen. And you get in there, and some things happen, and you're like, oof, okay, that was uncomfortable.
It was rough.
It wasn't near as scary or bad as we thought. So that was a pattern, I think, that got cemented in my psyche. So I started processing things differently. I'm like, oh, I'm feeling nervous or afraid. I'm like, wait a minute, but over and over and over and over and over again, endlessly, I was afraid of something and it didn't turn out to be that scary. So why am I allowing fear to dictate my decisions? And I want to drive that home right now, because in my observations and interactions with people, and this is a bold statement, but I believe it, the majority of people are operating through fear. They're basing so many of their decisions and their actions on fear. And these are, some of them are very big, but most of them are quite small. It's just these little kind of micro fears that create these micro actions or reactions. And so they stay very limited. And if you could visualize a person that's had 100 experiences contrasted to a person that's had 10,000 experiences, that is a vastly different human being. And they could literally be neighbors. And the one is like thinking like, oh yeah, we're pretty much the same. Me and my neighbor, we're the same. But the neighbor with 10,000 experiences is like, no, we're not the same. Like, we might as well live on different planets, man. Because when you have thousands and thousands and thousands of experiences, you can't not be developed.
Right.
You get the growth and the expansion, and you can't go back to your former dimensions. And so you understand
mentally,
things,
emotionally, physically,
socially, financially, all of spiritually, all of it. So you get things now because you've touched it, tasted it, felt it. Like, you perceive things in a way that other people can't. If they haven't experienced it, like, you can't.
Right.
You could watch all the cool documentaries online and all those great things, but unless you personally
have
go to
experienced
Africa
the physiological effect
and go on a safari, for example, you're personally there on a safari, and there's a lion right there next to your truck.
Totally different than the nature show.
Right.
Even though the nature show's cool.
It's awesome. It's great.
Right.
But being there is different. And I guess that's my point.
Well,
So then we don't have experiences mostly because of fear or overwhelm or worry or whatever it is. And so then we stay small. And so I wish there was some way, it doesn't exist that I know of. I wish there was a way just to see. I think I can perceive it now because I work with people so much. But you could see, like, if there was like some imaginary number over our heads, like this little halo of how many experiences you've had.
Sounds like a dystopian novel.
Yeah, it sounds weird, and then we'd be like, oh, then we'd just be judging people, and it'd go really bad. So I'm glad it doesn't exist. But just as a way of illustration for the principle, you could see how developed or underdeveloped the person is.
No wonder you do that thing because you've either had or not had that many experiences.
Exactly. So
it would be
you meet
insightful.
some people and you're like, well, yeah, no wonder. Like, you've had so many experiences. Like, that's why our conversations are so engaging and so filling. We can talk about so many things. It's so interesting. Wow. And you meet another person, you're like, okay, I understand a little bit. You've literally done almost nothing.
Right.
You've never been anywhere. You've never tried new things. You've barely read anything. You haven't had conversations with people who disagree with you. Like, you haven't pushed against your boundaries.
Really, that's the comfort zone. Well, and so, I mean, in this whole theme that we're going on, one of the reasons people are not able to or actively pursuing this dream life they want, whether they realize it's a dream life or not, but essentially pursuing what it is they want in life, is because they are pushing up against those fears. And the default for most people, including for us when we started out, is to back away from those fears.
And they leave the boundaries in place.
Yeah, exactly. Our default is to, oh my gosh, that's scary. I'm just going to retreat. Yep. But what we have learned firsthand again and again and again, that is literally the thing that ends up keeping you small.
Yep.
It ends up keeping you underdeveloped. And the only way to actually become the person you want to be is to push through those boundaries. You have to. When you face that boundary, when you have that opportunity, because really I see that as an opportunity. And this comes back to answering the question from my friend. Like, now we have learned that when our family faces those boundaries, and it's happened, I've visibly seen it happen, where we all start getting a little nervous, and we're like, whew, and there's emotions coming up, and we're feeling things. Maybe there's some tears. Like, it's happened. I'm like, okay, here we are. This is the edge. This is the edge of the comfort zone. What we do here and now matters so much.
So much. Because we directly and deliberately face the fear.
Exactly. So you and I have learned to take that role of like, okay, yeah, legit, there's fear here. There's overwhelm. There's this. Let us break this down and figure out how we can move forward step by step by doing the one little thing that we know we can do to move forward rather than, oh my gosh, we're scared. Let's go back to the comfort zone.
Yep.
That is the pattern that we have. I mean, we live by that now. Like, everything we do is essentially following that pattern. And that's the thing that has made all the difference.
Yes.
Like, everything we have in our life, everything we have pursued, everything we've become, everything we have achieved is because we follow that pattern. When we reach that discomfort, we know that that's the edge, and that is where we break through to the other side by facing the fear and moving through rather than retreating from it.
And so when we see the barrier, when we see the limiting factor, instead of pulling back like you want, the brain, the survival brain's
right.
like, step
it's automatic.
away, step back, like go.
Natural.
And so you feel it and you're like, you're like, wait a minute. Is there something genuinely, truly scary here? Because fear isn't always a bad thing. It's to keep us alive and keep us safe.
It's helpful.
But a lot of our fears are bogus.
Yeah.
Like our fears aren't facts. And so you stop and say, is there something truly, truly scary here? and your survival brain's like, yes, of course,
I'm gonna
run
die.
for your life, we're all gonna die. You're like, wait a minute, stop, just calm down for a second. Is there something truly scary? And you look and you're like, well, have other people done it, right? Are they doing it? That's where you stop. It's like, okay, well, this seems scary. Are other people doing it? And you're like, well, bro, there's a lot of people doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And, okay, let's look at the results. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so this must be my imagination making this scarier than it actually is. So in some ways, I guess visually, just to walk through this, you and I will walk up to the barrier and start looking around like, okay, it feels scary. It feels uncomfortable. Let's look around. Let's peek over the barrier.
Well, in a lot of ways, there's analogies to cliff jumping. Like our son and their friends have been doing a lot of cliff jumping lately. And every time they describe that, there's always that fear of standing at the edge. And, it's terrifying. And it's natural for our bodies to say, danger, this is dangerous, because there is potential danger there. But the thrill of then actually jumping over the edge and landing in the water, and, they love it. They absolutely love it.
They can't get enough of it.
But I think that's a perfect analogy.
Fears.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's a perfect analogy for this border between the comfort zone and the unknown, because it's a very similar thing physiologically for us to face that unknown, to look over the edge, to be afraid of what's over there, to feel like it is dangerous because, there's potential danger. But then the thrill of pushing through, of taking that leap, that's where the power lies. And if we refuse to go through that process, we literally can't grow. We cannot grow. We cannot develop. We cannot become a more fully enlightened person. There's so many levels there, mentally, emotionally, physiologically, spiritually, that are happening, that are contributing to the development of the person, that it's such a valuable experience that is now what we seek out. And in fact, whenever I see my kids afraid or nervous or whatever, I love to now help them process that, and we'll talk through it. We'll address all of their fears. We'll let them bring it up. If there's tears, well, in fact, okay, I think I want to share this story because you guys, if you listened to our episode about Mongolia, when we did our Mongolia trip in July, then you know that our 10-year-old fell off a horse at a full gallop. You actually rode up next to her. Your horse was at a full gallop. Saw her bounce off, tried to grab her, got a hold of her jacket. But of course, she was too heavy to hold with one arm. And so she got dragged around along the ground for a little bit. And then you fell off, I don't know, on top of her, but somehow rolled around together. And then you picked her up and held her in your arms. I mean, it was a challenging fall. It was not just a little drop onto the ground. It was a real deal. Now, amazingly, she didn't get hurt. In fact, she didn't even have any scratches on her face, which was incredible. She got back up. She got right back on her horse, and she walked back to camp. And it was amazing. But the thing that happened after was the most important part. And that was she cried. She was afraid. She was scared. And we spent a good, I would say, 45 minutes to an hour, me and her in the tent with her crying and talking through all of the trauma, quote unquote, of it happening and what happened and what might have happened and what she didn't like and what she was afraid of in the future happening. And we addressed all of it. And I think that is a super, super valuable process to helping you or your child be able to move through things that happen to them so that then in the future, they don't have that fear anymore. In fact, it came up today, and it was funny to me that she almost forgot that she had fallen off a horse. She was talking about her time in Mongolia and how much she loved it and all of this. I'm like, yeah, I remember you fell off the horse. She's like, oh yeah, I did.
All of her associations with horses are positive.
It was all positive, despite the fact that was a very traumatic experience, because it wasn't just a simple teeny little fall. It was kind of it was a big deal. Yeah. And it could have been really bad.
Right.
But processing all of those emotions is what helps her move through it. So now she doesn't live in fear, but can have the confidence to continue to do hard things and scary things and try new things.
And this is such an important principle, because most of us we want to desperately cling to our fears.
Yeah.
We want to
right.
hold on to them. I see this a lot when we're inviting people to try new things and make changes and attempt things, go out and have a new experience.
Which is essentially our whole life in
our
business.
whole life is this. And we're like, hey, we'll try this. It's exposure to something new and uncomfortable. And it's so fascinating to be an observer in that process, because the survival brain kicks in and people will cling and claw desperately to hang on to their fear or their conviction of, I guess it makes them feel safe or comfortable. Again, it's a lie. We want security, and so we hold on to it. But it's interesting watching how much they'll fight to remain, even when there's so little actual threat.
Well,
And it makes people uncomfortable sometimes to be around us.
It definitely does. But I want to say that, I feel that it's understandable, because that is how the human body works. And I mean, if you think about our history as human beings, there's value in holding on to some of those experiences, because then that's how we learn. Because then we can teach our children or our grandchildren or the neighbor, like, hey, watch out for that cliff over there or that cave because it has a lion, or, we're able to pass on information that's valuable. But I think especially in our day to day, when our threats are almost not real threats, you know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of times we're scared of simple things.
We're afraid of getting a negative comment on social media.
Well, yeah, there's things
Seriously,
like that.
that's a real thing.
But, okay, another fascinating aspect, too, because I was thinking about this on our Mongolia trip, where it was a trip that was a real-life adventure. Like, there was a real danger. In fact, we had multiple people fall off their horses. You fell off twice, at least. It was a real danger. Now, there's a time and place, and in fact, it still exists in the world. The Mongolians, they're used to that. They live in this world. In fact, they would laugh at you guys when you fell off the horse, because they're just like, oh yeah, this is a normal part of our life. Like, we fall off the horses. But our society is so comfortable and easy now, and we literally have so little experience in...
Everything's overprotected.
Yeah, doing real dangerous, adventurous activities, that for some people, it becomes very traumatic when anything happens to them that's not safe and comfortable, right? So it doesn't matter what it is, something can happen, and because of our instinctual brain, we're like, oh my gosh, don't do that again because it's dangerous. And so I understand how and why it becomes a stumbling block for people and how it prevents them from doing other things. But I guess what we're trying to talk about in this episode is that we have to gain awareness of those things and say, okay, yeah, that happened. That happened to me and I didn't like it and it was painful and maybe I have an injury from it or maybe whatever, this thing happened. But if we allow that to then now define our future.
Yes, or define us.
Or to define us, that's where we now limit ourselves. And we may think like, well, it's not connected. Like, if I never do that thing again, it doesn't matter. But I think
totally
that we
matters.
have learned.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I think we've learned through experience that everything's connected. And if you have one area of your life where you're afraid to face it, you're afraid to embrace the challenge, it really does end up limiting you in multiple areas of your life.
Absolutely. I guess here's a simple but real example for a lot of people. It's like, say you had a negative experience with a dog when you were a kid. Maybe you got bit by a dog. And so then you embrace this fear like dogs are dangerous. So then you grow up, you get, twice or three times your size when it happened. But you still have this old programming of dogs are dangerous, and so you're afraid of dogs. And you might be arguing like, yeah, I can go my whole life and be afraid of dogs. Like, I'm not going to be an underdeveloped person. I can still live a great life and be afraid of dogs and whatever. Maybe, but I guess I'd like to point out here is like by choosing to face that one and working through that one, it's going to unlock a lot of other potentials. It's going to, every improvement we make in one area has a positive effect in another area.
Absolutely.
So if I start with this one, and that's a simple example of like, wait a minute, I'm much bigger now. And are all dogs dangerous? Well, no, of course not. Are some dogs dangerous? Sure. but can I do something about that? Yeah, of course I can. You know, I'm a capable adult now. I'm bigger, and I understand dogs. I can start facing that. I can start approaching dogs. I can start petting dogs. I can rewrite the programming in my head. Doing that process is perfect because now you have a framework to do it with all these other things.
Exactly.
I suspect that we as human beings are walking around with many, many, many examples of like that in our heads, in our psyche. All these fears, all this old programming, and we just need to go through and rewrite them, update them, upgrade them again and again and again and again, because too many good people are just living behind their fears.
Right. Well, and as you were talking about that, it was fascinating because in my mind I could see this process occurring of when you decide to face that fear, and then you have to go through the process of bit by bit unlocking and figuring out how to move past it. There's all of these nuances of things that occur, one of which would be learning how to tell the difference between a legit dangerous dog and just a friendly dog. And when you have I'm afraid of dogs as the automatic approach to things, it's actually like part of your brain shuts off and you're not able to tell the difference between a friendly dog and a mean dog.
And not even willing to think about it.
And not even willing to think about it or face it. And that is an analogy of things that are happening in other areas of your life, because I've experienced this myself, that once you then go through that process, now, like you said, you now have a new framework of being able to approach other parts of your life in a similar way of like, well, wait, maybe even with my spouse here, I'm, putting up this thing of like, my spouse is this way all the time, rather than learning to see the nuances of how they're interacting and how, we can interact in a better way. Simply because I've learned a new skill of facing a fear and moving through it and gaining new tools for being able to face something I used to be afraid of.
In my mind right now, I'm just processing hundreds of examples of this from our own lives and from all the people we've been able to work with. Like, is this coming up again and again? All these little fears, all these little limiting beliefs, all these little fixed mindsets that you're right. It becomes, that's right there. There's the limit. There's the boundary of anything from, well, kids are this way, toddlers are this way, teens are this way, marriage is like this, religion's like this, motorcycles are that, Mexicans are this way, Muslims are that way, like whatever. You could just go through all these things. And again, I want to really emphasize this. Those of you who are listening, and every one of us, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of these little limiters, these little boundaries, and we need to start working through each of them. And the more we work through them, the better we get at it, and the faster we start eliminating them. And I know, because I've experienced myself and I've helped others, some of them, when you eliminate it, you eliminate one, and it automatically dissolves 4 or 5
like a domino
of them.
effect.
Yeah, it just takes them out. So you're like, let's get rid of this one, and bam, immediately when that's gone, 5 to 10 others are immediately gone as well.
Right.
And you're like, now I have so much freedom in my life, and I can try all these new things. I'm actually enjoying an experience that I used to hate.
Besides the fact that you actually, and this is real metaphysically, you free up energy that was previously stuck to now focus on different things. So you have all of this, because it takes energy to be afraid and to resist something. That requires energy. We don't really think that that's a thing. It's automatic and we're just doing it. But it really is it's using mental, emotional, physical energy to resist and to be afraid. And when you overcome that, you now can take all of that energy to use towards mastery of whatever it was you're afraid of.
Directing your life in the right direction. Besides
the fact that, because we're talking about, being afraid of dogs, and that seems like a silly thing, and you could go your whole life without being afraid of while still being afraid of dogs. But if you have that your entire life and you never face that fear and learn how to push through it, you miss out on gaining the skill of how to overcome your fears, which is one of the most valuable things you can ever learn. If you can't learn how to face and overcome your fears, you will live a limited life.
Big time.
It's just that simple.
And so will your kids, because they will follow your lead.
You have to face those fears and you have to move through them, if for nothing else, to gain the skill
Yep.
of being able to do it.
Exactly.
And so for us at this point in our life, anytime we do face those fears, okay, most of the time when we do face those fears, we push through them. We move ahead because we've learned to recognize this pattern, to know that this is the key.
This is the way.
This is the way to becoming the person I want to become,
Yep.
to achieving all of the things I want to achieve. Facing the fears and pushing through is how I get there. Facing overwhelm and then breaking it down step by step and moving through it is how I get to the other side of my comfort zone or discomfort zone, to achieving and having everything I want.
Yes. I think it's worth adding to this so that we understand because you might be like, you guys are making a big deal out of these little things. Like, I can go my whole life and it's not a big deal. But I think there's unexpected collateral consequences for simple things. Even let's do the fear of a dog, or the fear of water, the fear of fire, the fear of motorcycles, whatever it is. Pick your fear and your little thing, and you think, I don't need to fix that. I don't need to face that. It's not a big deal. It's not gonna limit my life. Because of all of our experiences, I can already think of examples where a fear of dogs could keep you from meeting somebody
Or traveling.
really awesome.
Or
Or going to a certain place or cool place because there's dogs there. Or water, and some fear of water or fire or motorcycles or whatever. You just pick your thing, a fear of flying, of airplanes, of trains or whatever. We come up with these things and we just put that limit there and we say, no, I can do all these other things and I don't have to face that one. But what you're automatically doing is just closing off these sections of life
opportunity or
and
possibility.
opportunity.
Yeah.
So you're closing the door on this opening that goes to all these opportunities across
It's like
the
a portal.
globe. It is a portal.
Lots of worlds.
Yes, it is. And you're closing that.
Yeah.
And you're saying it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
Like I don't have.
There's like a whole universe of experience over there. You're saying
I
it's
don't
not
ever
a big
have
deal?
to get on a motorcycle or whatever. And you're like, well, yeah, but there's going to be portals
Right.
to all kinds of things, and we want to open up the portals.
Well, and to bring this back to, I think, something pragmatic, for me, I've learned, because you're right, yeah, there could be lots and lots of things you're afraid of, and it may never even be relevant or important for you to face every single one of those. But if you keep bumping up against something like that, you're invited to go somewhere. Oh, but I'd have to fly, and I don't want to do that. Or you're invited to go do something, but no, I don't do that thing.
Even if you're not invited, the passing thought of like, we should go there, and you go, oh, no, we shouldn't.
It's scary,
Yeah.
right? I think for me, those are more of the clues
The indicators.
or the indicators that is the specific thing for you
Yep.
that you need to address.
Yep.
And for me, that shows up in lots of ways. It shows up as opportunity, right? If I have the opportunity for something and then I don't take advantage of it specifically because of fear, that's like, okay, I'm literally limiting my life and my portals by not facing this specific fear, especially because it's right here in my face.
Here's what's concerning to me, because I've seen it so many times, is all of that is happening subconsciously or unconsciously.
Yes, it's true.
And we get to see it a lot because we're leading trips, having adventures. We're observing people all the time. We're coaching people. And so we're rolling along, an opportunity pops up. We're like, let's do that. And somebody's like, no, let's not. And it's unconscious. No, we're not going to do that. And I say, well, okay, wait a minute. Let's talk through this. Why? No, let's not. I'm like, hold on. Just take a couple breaths. Bring back your prefrontal cortex. What's wrong? Yeah, I just don't want to. Well, why? It's okay. Talk me through this. Well, I'm afraid. What are you afraid of? Oh, this thing. Ah, interesting. Why are you afraid of that? When I was a kid, this. Okay, there it is. But all of that was subconscious or unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
I see it all the time. So even those of you listening, you might be listening to podcasts and say, yeah, that's great, Dennings. We're going to do that. That's fantastic. But first, you have to have a very heightened awareness of what's going on. You're literally choosing not to do things or choosing to do something else And if you stop and really think through why you're choosing something else, it's because you're afraid of the thing you really want.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But it's all happening so quickly and so subconsciously, unless somebody's there to say, hey, wait, why not?
Well, and I think that is a key, because I know we've talked, I've mentioned in passing about being able to break it down into step-by-step actions. That's a key part of this, because when you can vocalize what it is exactly that you're feeling and what it is that you're afraid of, when you can name that thing, there's a lot of power there. Because now, I've even noticed for myself that sometimes just naming it all of a sudden is like, oh yeah, that's silly. Why am I afraid of that? That's not really that big of a deal. And then you realize, okay, you know what? If I do this small little action, this big, huge thing is not going to happen. We tend to catastrophize.
Yep.
And you're like, okay, I'm going to take that small action. I can do that one little thing, And we might think that, well, that's not a big deal because I'm really afraid of X, Y, Z. Well, as long as you can take one step in the right direction, you're on the right path. That is a part of facing the fear and breaking down the overwhelm, is just by moving in the right direction instead of, like we talked about, moving away from it.
Yep.
It's the moving away, that's where the danger lies.
Yep.
The more we move away, the worse off we'll be in the long run. We have to move toward what we're afraid of rather than moving away from it.
Especially because we've seen this, and maybe those of you listening have experienced it. When you step back, your limiters, they follow you.
Yeah.
And they start to enclose you.
Yeah.
And you become more afraid and more enclosed and more isolated.
Yeah, we know of people who have done that continually again and again, to a point where now leaving their house is scary.
Yeah.
They're afraid to go out because, in fact, I noticed this with myself actually, and I think particularly around COVID or something. Like, I was used to grocery delivery, Amazon delivery. Like, I was in my house all the time. We travel the world, right? But in some ways that's very different than just living your normal life. And I remember actually like going out to the store and being like, oh, interacting with these people, this is so terrifying, or whatever, it's silly, but like that's the natural state.
Yeah.
If you refuse to engage with the world,
if you keep retreating
and all the things in front of you, then your world just gets smaller and smaller, and so more and more and more things become terrifying.
Yep, exactly.
But the more you engage with the world, the less terrifying it becomes.
Now, some of you are listening to this and hearing our examples, you're like, that's not me, I'm none of those things. But I've legit have had conversations with good, successful people who were afraid of the ocean, or were afraid of mountains, or afraid of rainforests, or rivers, or whatever. Like, and they're there, and maybe it's talking to new people, or maybe it's talking to strange people. Maybe it's a fear of failure, or maybe it's a fear of looking like a failure. And the key is, so those of you listening, I want you to like really embrace this. Really take this to heart. And some of you might be thinking, this doesn't affect me that much, or whatever. Like, come hang out with us. I tell people when they come to spend time with us, I'm like, hey, we'll have a good time, but like, fair warning, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to spend time with our family, because you'll simultaneously see that like we're super chill, but we're also super intense. And when we go out to play, like, we play hard, and we go to work, we work hard, and like we're squeezing the juice out of life. And for most people, we're like, oh man, that's a bit much. That's a lot. And people frequently are like, the first couple of days, they're like, yeah, this is amazing. And then they slip back into their old ways quickly and easily, because like it's a lot. If you come, and I want you to come on our trips and adventures. I want you to come stay with us and do this. But, and I'm only saying this as an illustration, as an example. If you spend, and it could be with us, it could be with somebody else, but if you spend time, a good chunk of time with somebody who's consistently doing things that bump up against your limiting factors. And the same is true for me and you. Like if we go spend time with somebody else who's consistently doing something that bumps up against our fears or worries or limitations, there's that friction, that bumping. And it's like, oh, man, it's getting uncomfortable around here. And you might hang for a couple of days, but then afterwards, like, yeah, I can either have to face it and overcome it, or I'm going to retreat. And I guess my invitation to all of you listening is face them. Face them all. Put yourself in situations where you're going to feel it. And I know a bunch of you listening are coming to stay with us, right? We open up the World School Family Resort. We have a steady flow of families coming for the next 6-8 months. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of you are coming to stay. And when you get here, we're going to have a blast. But I promise you can't not bump up against those fears and those limits, the barriers. We have to. And that's just the way you and I do life now. We're consistently searching out and bumping up against our own barriers. We're doing it with our children. But then when the people around us, it's almost unintentional, but it's just how we live. We're like, oh, we're going to try this. And they're like, no. Why? You're like, no, we're going to eat this way. We're going to do these things. We're going to try this stuff. And that's the point. An expanded life is a great life, where a constricted, limited life is weak. And hold on, let me share this one last thought. It's like it just came to my mind. I think it was Socrates that said the unexamined life isn't worth living. This was at least part, I think, of what he was getting at. Is like if you don't examine your limitations, your fears, your worries, the things that are holding you back, then you're not going to live very much.
Right.
You're going to be alive, but you're not living.
Well, in essence, that's exposure therapy, which is, I want to talk about that in a second. But I also remembered my son was, he's 19, and he was telling me his bio on Instagram has a quote that says, the bold may not live forever, but the courageous, now I'm really killing it. The bold may not live forever, but the timid do not live at all. Something like that. I don't think that's the exact word, but something about timidity or whatever. And that's kind of the idea of maybe there's more risks involved, but you're not really living if you're not trying. Right. If you're not doing things and taking on risks, that's not really living. That's just not dying, like they say in the Croods, right? But I wanted to talk about exposure therapy for a minute because that, if you study psychology, that's one of the basic tenets, that if you have a fear of something, if you have a phobia or you feel even a lack of competence, the key to overcoming that is through exposure therapy, which essentially means you just expose yourself to the thing you're afraid of. Yep. That is how you overcome. Now, this is true even with serious trauma. Serious, because we're talking about all of these things, and some of them seem trivial. But we're fully aware that there's real trauma that exists. There's sexual abuse, there's rape, there's violence. There's horrendous things going on. I guess what I want to emphasize is that this is used in clinical psychology. It's not just something we're making up. This is a real technique to help you even with those difficult challenges. Yep. There is a way to safely expose yourself to the thing that you're afraid of so that you can gain the competence and the confidence to know that you can face that and to be able to handle it. That right there is real power. And that's, in essence, the emphasis we're trying to make, that real power, really the power to live the life of your dreams, comes by gaining competence and confidence, which comes from facing and overcoming your fears. Yep. Or at least moving through your fears, even if you never overcome them, per se.
And visually, we can see all of this on a spectrum, right? Where, and we have so much empathy and sensitivity to somebody who's experienced something extremely traumatic. Many of you have probably experienced something that I just don't understand because I've not been through it myself, and so I'm super sensitive to that and understand that, and there's a process there of healing. Then on the other end of the spectrum, I kind of want to rant here a little bit and drop the hammer. Like many of us, as full-grown men and women are walking around with these like pathetic little fears and worries and concerns. We have these little limiters in place that are absurd. And this is one of my favorite things about coaching when I'm coaching people is we get to examine and expose these things, and you kind of bring them out to the light. And I just say metaphorically, we're setting it on the table, or figuratively, like, hey, so what was that? Wait, hold, you just said that in passing. What did you just say? And they're like, oh, I didn't even know. I'm like, no, hold up. You just said, and they're like, what? And we set it on the table. I'm like, did you literally just say that you're afraid of that? And when you say it out loud and you set it on the table, so to speak, they're like, yeah, that's okay. Now, like saying it out loud, looking, it looks ridiculous. Like, yeah, it is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And I guess I want to say that with love, but also with some frankness. We've got a bunch of wonderful human beings that are living these super limited lives because of a bunch of, the Spanish word just came to my mind, tonterías. It's just like, just a bunch of dumb little things, just dumb things, right? And it's true. And it's not that I'm like judging. It's that I've worked with so many clients that when they say it out loud, they're like, that's really dumb. Mm-hmm. That's really silly. It's kind of pathetic. Like, why am I still letting that be a factor in my life? And so right now, I to those of you listening, I want to give that invitation, like, examine all those things. Look at them. Say them out loud. Set them on the table, so to speak, and be like, well, that's lame. That's super lame. Why am I letting my life be limited and restricted because of all these little dumb things? Yeah. I'm done. I'm going to be a grown man here, or a grown woman, and stop being childish about what some random person at the store might think of you if you do something.
Or if we bring those things out on the table, and they are a big deal, because there are going to be some of those, excuse me, then we go through this process.
Yeah.
We go through this process of walking through, what are we catastrophizing here? What are we thinking is the worst case scenario that's going to happen? And convince ourselves that we're right or that we're wrong, and kind of dispel that fear by speaking about it and talking through it, so that we can really bring clarity to what it is that we're afraid of, mm-hmm. rather than, because it's interesting, there's another theory in psychology that's essentially floating anxiety. Free-floating anxiety. Mm-hmm. And it's basically where we have this fear or anxiety about something that's not really attached to something. And in a case like this, like if you're being chased by a lion, that's not free-floating anxiety. You really have a reason to be afraid.
And that's a real threat.
And that is a real threat. That is a real cause for fear. Mm-hmm. But if you're standing there completely safe and you're thinking about being chased by a lion and you're afraid, that's more, it's not exactly, but that's more an idea of free-floating anxiety, because there's no lion around.
Right. There's no threat.
There's no real concrete threat that is threatening you right now. So when there
was a squirrel. Again, I say that as a silly example, but sometimes like, there's a squirrel. You're like, what is that squirrel going to do to you?
So really all we're afraid of is the thing that might happen. But when we can
that's our
vocalize
overactive imagination, right, exactly. Creating things that aren't real.
And we come back in a way to reality, and we're like, oh, okay, yeah, actually that is just a squirrel, or it is just some water, or it is just
a stranger,
a cute little dog. Then we realize, okay, here I am now in the present reality, and I actually don't have anything to be afraid of. That is a type of the exposure therapy I'm talking about, where get out of our heads and get into the real world, and then realize, oh, I'm actually capable of doing this thing, or taking this step, or looking at that dog, In fact, I've heard Jordan Peterson specifically talk about, the exposure therapy, and he's like, he gave some silly example, but he was a clinical psychologist, and these are real things. Like, there was this woman who was afraid of balloons or something, And so the first step was just being able to have a deflated balloon in the same room with her, And then step by step, he would walk through to the point where now, okay, I can be in the same room with balloons and I'm not afraid anymore. Or an elevator. You know, they're afraid of being on an elevator. In fact, so afraid they couldn't even look at the elevator. And just step by step, you'd be like, okay, we're going to walk down and we're going to look at the elevator, you know. And little by little, as you take those steps that you think you can't take because you're so afraid, that's how you actually get over being afraid.
We live in such a comfortable time, such a luxurious time. I love studying history. I just absolutely love history, and I love historical fictions. And as you look across, you know, what's written history, you realize like our time is so luxurious and so easy and so comfortable. It's like it's unheard of. It doesn't take much. You don't have to be a historian to realize like this is unheard of. This kind of comfort, so comfortable in fact that we can get all worked up about silly little things. And then when you start contrasting it, you realize, man, my fears that I think are so real, at least feel real to me, they're actually ridiculous, and they're not a real threat at all. Like the things, especially when contrasted against history,
right?
And the real things that real people were facing. Obviously, World War II is an example. Those are things. There's lots of stories and books available, and you just read those stories. You realize, okay, like,
well, dying from diseases and childbirth, and you know, I mean, there was all sorts of things.
So much, and then you realize, well, my little problems are genuine Mickey Mouse problems. My little fears are Mickey Mouse fears. That, for me at least, has been helpful. Again, we're trying to share here what has worked for us. That, for me, has worked a lot. When I'm like, man, that's scary. And I think, hold up. Like,
going to war would be scary.
What would Dietrich Bonhoeffer think about my little fear? Like, give me a break. Right?
And he's trying to figure out how to assassinate Hitler.
Yeah. And a good guy. He's plotting multiple assassinations of Hitler and the Nazis. Like, and he chose to go back into Germany to fight.
And ended up dying in a German prison.
Right. So, like okay, let's have a contrast here that puts it into perspective. And let's face a lot of these. Now, you guys, if you're new here, welcome. if you've been around, you know I'm a tear the Band-Aid off kind of guy, and you know, baby steps are for babies. Let's take some big leaps. And with a bunch of these small fears, you could do that. You could take a bunch of leaps. And no joke, I've done this, and I can recommend this because I've done this. You might line up a list of these little fears you have, little insecurities, and crud, you could face 5 or 10 of them in a week. You could orchestrate an experience that just completely annihilates several of your fears in one swoop. Gone. Like they're no longer part of your life because you went in hardcore, faced them all, came out the other side and realized, man, I should not have been afraid of that. I should not have let that thing hold me back for months or years or decades even. Like, how ridiculous. And you lean it, and I've done that. And I've done it with my kids. We've deliberately gone and chased down big things, and you come out the other side realizing, okay, I no longer need to even be concerned about that. I don't need to give it a second thought. It's gone from my life. So lean into that kind of stuff, man, because living an extraordinary life is worth every effort. It's worth whatever it costs us. It's worth facing all the fears that are keeping us from that.
Right.
And a lot of you are just rolling along, held back, literally limited by these fears and worries and insecurities.
Overwhelm.
I mean, all this stuff.
When you're not realizing that right there is the path to everything you want.
Yep. So, okay, here's this. Your spouse will point these things out sometime. Don't resist it. Your friends, family members, total strangers will point it out to you sometimes. Don't resist it. This is one of those moments where we want to cling to it. We want to hold on to it.
Be defensive and say,
we get super. And you're like, wait a minute. Why don't you just try it? Don't you back off. This is my thing, and I'm keeping it for the rest of my life.
Because this is why.
Yeah. Like, no. If a coach or an experience, or I mean, you're out somewhere and you take a guided tour, and the tour guide's like, okay, let's go do this. And you're like, ah! Like, be open to that.
That's your sign.
Yeah. You're like, okay, say yes. Say yes. I love like taking people rock climbing and rappelling, cliff jumping, like things like that, because they naturally induce fears. It's an experience, especially rappelling, man. Just see people just they're trembling like a leaf in the wind at the edge of the cliff. They're totally safe. They're all roped up, and they're like, there's just something scary. I still get scared when I lean over the back of on the rope and I look at my gear and I'm like, oh, I'm going over. It's still scary. But you do things like that because then it helps with the other things.
Right.
But I wholeheartedly believe, and what you said earlier just nailed it. But like one of the worst things we can do is live within limits. Stop right there.
Live within limits.
Yeah. That's one of the worst things we do.
Right.
Because you condemn yourself and your posterity to your current limitations.
It's like the flea.
Yeah.
They
did a study. And they took all these fleas and they put it in a jar, a little 3-inch jar, and they put the lid on.
Fleas can jump 10,000...
200 times.
200 times their height?
Their own height, yep.
Okay. Which for like a human would be jumping like 10,000 feet
No, like 1,000 feet or something. I don't know. So, but a flea can jump 200 times its own height. Okay? So they put it in a little 3-inch jar, and for a little bit, the fleas would jump and smack against the lid, smack against the lid. They left them in there for a couple of days. This is a true story. You can research it. Not a story. It's a research project. They took the lid off.
Study.
And the fleas could have jumped out, but they didn't. They no longer jumped higher than the height of the lid.
Yes.
And then what was most fascinating and so important is neither did their...
posterity.
We call it posterity or children, offspring. Neither did their offspring. Let that hit home.
Jump it higher than the height of that lid.
Capacity, it had the potential to jump 200 times its own height, but their offspring only jumped the height of that lid. That is profound and powerful, and we see it with humans as well. Many times the parents are the major limiting factors
They're setting the
for
ceiling.
the kids. Yep.
Right.
And they're like, well, I want my kids to do things. I'm like, well,
then you have
to do them. You have to lead the way. Do not expect your kids to do things that you're not willing to do.
Right.
It's on you. If my kids are unwilling to do things because of limits that I passed along, it's on me. And if I want them to go past those limits, then I have to lead the way through that limiting barrier.
Yes.
Yeah. So important, so powerful. Okay, if you guys have any specific questions about this or any specific fears or worries and you want us to walk through it, send us a question. This would be a good one. This would be very, very fun. I would love that.
Yeah.
So if you've got one, you're like, hey, I don't know how to get over this, or this is one that's tormented me, or just reach out to us, share those things. Love you guys. Thanks for listening. Reach upward.